Sweet the whispers in your ear whenever ember wanders near.
Very good. So yeah, we'll do Nerdrotic's review of the Odyssey. All right. So here we go. So this is his review. This is his talk. Now he may talk in overarching similar to how Clownfish did. So let's see what we've got.
What was your driving force behind it?
Emma was my driving force behind it, so she could speak to that.
Well.
What's been your...
Wait. Is this... Wait, what did he say her name was?
Behind it.
What was your driving force behind it?
Emma was my driving force behind it.
Is this... Wait, Emma. So this is the woman who did the quote-unquote translation of the Odyssey. No, I think he said Emma, not Amber. I think he's... Hang on. Emma. So this is Emma Wilson. She did the translation for the Odyssey. And basically, for those of you who don't know, she is a massive fucking feminist. Okay? Emma Wilson, who I believe this is. I've seen video footage, but I've seen her when she was slightly younger. She's a massive fucking feminist. And all she does in her talks is just basically go on and on and on about toxic masculinity. She basically hates men. This is someone who hates men and is a toxic feminist. She is absolutely a horrible person. She translated the Odyssey into English and fundamentally changed the story of the Odyssey. Like the Odyssey and the Iliad and the Odyssey, she did a fundamental change to the entire story. Yes, she hates men. She is a horrible, horrible fucking person. And the fact that Christopher Nolan relied so heavily on her for full interpretation of the story, and people were saying this before the Odyssey ever even came out. People were already saying that because they're working off of her translation, that the movie was going to suck balls.
So she could speak to that.
Well.
What's been your Odyssey in terms of fighting for your identity or your Hollywood career?
Well, it's always been a battle. I mean, Hollywood is not...
God, this fucker. I am so fucking sick of Leguizamo. I am so fucking sick of him. Okay? He's another elitist who literally all he does in interviews is whine and bitch and moan that Latinos are not represented in Hollywood. That is literally all he does. You could have a movie that is entirely about Latinos and he will say Latinos are not represented. Like, all he does is virtue signal, bitch, and moan. And yeah, he is getting pushed everywhere. He is like, they are astroturfing the fuck out of quote unquote minority actors now, which is why I said that Elliot Page is going to get astroturfed to fucking hell and back because of this movie. This movie, they wrote a part for her specifically so they could start astroturfing the shit out of her. Because the role, and I'm probably jumping ahead here, but I'm sorry, I gotta say it. Nerdrotic probably is going to talk about this. The role that was written for Elliot Page in this movie is a character that is not even in the Odyssey or the Iliad. It is from a completely separate work. But they wrote that part into this movie specifically for, and I'm not joking, specifically for Elliot Page. That part was inserted into the story of the Odyssey with Elliot Page in mind. I'm telling you, Hollywood is going to be astroturfing the fuck out of Elliot Page after this movie.
the most accepting place.
No Greek xeno.
When I think
Exactly.
about equality or equity, I don't think about taking from a male figure. I think about getting what is due.
These are the people that they hired on for this movie. John Leguizamo saying that that Latinos aren't represented. This bitch who is all about I want to take everything from men because I am also another toxic feminist, and said that if Homer was in front of her in that moment, what would you say to Homer, one of the greatest epics in human history? Her response was, why don't women get more screen time in your epic, Homer? Complete with bullshit ghetto head tilt. Like, this is, like, everybody, in the days and months leading up to the Odyssey's release, people were saying, like, oh, like, I love Phoenix, okay? I love Phoenix from Side Scrollers, but Phoenix was trying to say on Side Scrollers, trusting Christopher Nolan. Christopher Nolan's not the kind of person to check boxes. He has a plan. Phoenix, I love you. You know I do. But oh, Phoenix, were you so wrong about this? This was not Christopher Nolan having a plan. Christopher Nolan this was 100% a checkbox movie, but because he was attached to it, they were counting on his name carrying them to the Oscars. This was a movie made specifically to win awards. It was not a movie made for moviegoers. This entire movie, was Oscar bait. You had a black woman playing Helen of Troy. You had a trans person playing a character that was not even in the original story that they had to insert specifically for this trans character. It was all Oscar bait. Because, as a reminder, to qualify for the Oscars, you need to literally check boxes, i.e., having quote-unquote minority or underrepresented people in a variety of positions within your movie in order to be considered for the Oscars. This was absolutely specifically done for the Oscars. This was to win an award.
To me.
If you don't create great Latin roles,
There we
how
go.
are we going to get nominated?
In history, women have been vilified, whether you're a midwife, whether you're...
This stupid bitch. Okay, I want to know where her fucking logic was. Women have been vilified for centuries. It doesn't matter if you're a midwife. I want to know where this brain trust ever heard that midwives were vilified. I want her to point to a single fucking example throughout human history where a woman was vilified simply for being a midwife. By the way, for those of you that don't know, a midwife is a woman who was experienced in aiding a pregnant woman in giving birth. Midwives were there when physicians were not available to basically help a woman to give birth. She had enough medical knowledge that she could facilitate aiding a woman giving birth, and they were revered. They were not vilified. Midwives were revered. So I don't know where the fuck she's getting this from.
You know, herbalist, whether you're a healer, whether you're just in tune.
Herbalist or a healer, and she starts off does she even know what vilified means? Does this dumb bitch even know what the word vilified even means? By the way, for those of you that are confused about what I'm talking about, vilified means turned into a villain. When you say you are vilifying someone, you are painting them as a villain. She literally just said women have been vilified throughout history, regardless if you're a midwife, if you're an herbalist, or if you're a healer. She means witches, then she should have fucking said witches. If she meant witches, then she should have said it. Because she's saying that midwives, herbalists, and healers were vilified. Which is stupid on a level that is just, I can't even express it.
With the moon, like, women have just been vilified throughout history.
Especially being a Latin man, I want to be the one who has the agency. So I choose.
Hilda, I'm pausing a lot. I know. I'm sorry. I'm pausing a lot, but I'm discovering shit here. Is John Leguizamo gay? He's talking about, he's going on and on, but being a Latin man, yeah, okay, virtue signal you want. Is he gay? Because I just noticed the earring. Is John Leguizamo gay? I have not heard anything. I thought he had a wife, so I wasn't sure if he was or not. I'm just curious. I don't, again, if he is, it's no big deal. Like, I don't care. It doesn't matter if he's gay. Let me express that. If he's gay, that does make a difference because contrary to the activists, I can work. Contrary to what the activists and the SJR say, nobody cares if you're gay anymore. Despite what the virtue signalers love to and scream about and pretend to be victims, nobody gives a fuck if you're gay anymore. Okay, saying I'm gay is literally met with, okay, and you're telling me this because I don't care. He hasn't come out, but there have been suspicions. I think he is. I think he's going to be coming out before too long.
Choose the roles I want to be, and I want to be as varied and as complex as Latin people can be.
Looking at nature as if it's some sort of cis heteropatriarchal
here we
structure
go.
is absurd, and that this gender binary that we've created is nothing but a quaint little myth.
Shut the fuck up. Shut the fuck up, you virtue signaling troglodyte. Binary is a myth. No, it's not. You can feed into your own delusions as much as you want. Binary is not a myth. There is male and there's female. That is a biological fact. No matter how much the fringe scientists that like to pretend this doesn't exist try, male and female is a constant. And just because you're transgender does not mean that male and female constant has suddenly gone away. So kindly shut the hell up.
Myth.
Dumb bitch.
I'd be like, so Homer, how do you feel about this screen time given to these women, considering?
How does Homer feel about screen time regarding a literary work that was written only? And she's saying, Homer, why didn't you you need to hear this again.
So Homer, how do you feel about this screen time given to these women, considering how little you spend with them?
And then you have her her completely cucked co-star here. I don't even know who the fuck this is. All I know is he's a little cuck boy. It's just like, ho, 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 ho. Dude, she's not gonna fuck you. Okay? No matter how much you simp for her by going, oh, you slay queen, she's not fucking you. Sorry. She hates men. She's not gonna fuck you.
Oh. Okay.
Nerderotic.com.
Greetings, you over 1 million hellions and the 40% who haven't subscribed yet. It is without a doubt Christopher Nolan is Hollywood's last movie star and the last director where every time he releases a film, it is a genuine event. He's the only director in Tinseltown who could put butts in seats on his name alone. The only other name that comes close is old Jimmy Cameron, and he's only made 3 movies in the last 17 years about indigenous blue furry space people that are a practice in misanthropy, while
James Cameron is another one that has fallen so far. His name, all of these big directors, Christopher Nolan, James Cameron, their names don't carry weight anymore. James Cameron's name has not carried weight for some time because no one gives a shit about the Avatar movies. Ridley Scott's kind of fallen off a little bit too. But James Cameron, he's fallen off so hard. He's always done his Avatar and nobody gives a shit about it. The second Avatar movie did okay, I think. I think the second Avatar did well enough. But nobody cares. Nobody really cares about what James Cameron's doing because he's focused wholly on Avatar. I think that's all he's going to do is Avatar now. I don't think he's going to be doing anything else. Christopher Nolan, yeah, he put butts in seats, although let's be real. Christopher Nolan does not have a stellar reputation. As much as people like to try and pretend he does, Nolan does not have a spotless reputation. He's done some good stuff. He has. Batman Begins was fine. The Dark Knight was great. Dark Knight, I think, was one of his best films. So that absolutely I'll agree. The Dark Knight Rises, shit. Didn't like it. I thought Dark Knight Rises was terrible. That they completely fucked with the lore in a way that did not make sense, because Dark Knight Rises, he was trying to basically take about 2 or 3 different established Batman storylines and smush them together, and it did not fucking work. So I think Dark Knight Rises was terrible. Oppenheimer, he did good. Like people loved what he did with Oppenheimer. Tenet, fucking terrible movie. Did not like Tenet whatsoever. It made no goddamn sense. They're bringing up shit that never comes up again. It's a confusing mess. You couldn't hear hardly anything of it. Like the dialogue, you could not hear the fucking dialogue in most of Tenet. And like none of it made really any sense. So Tenet, terrible. Inception I'd say was okay. I don't think Inception was the masterpiece people made it out to be. I thought it was perfectly decent, but I don't consider it a masterpiece. You guys say Dunkirk. I've not seen Dunkirk. Dunkirk was apparently okay. I guess it was okay. Did he do Harry Potter? No, he did not do Harry Potter. And yes, Dark Knight, I should point out, The Dark Knight was only a good movie because of Heath Ledger. Heath Ledger 100% made The Dark Knight the stellar, epic movie that it was. Heath Ledger carried that movie to greatness. Hands down, he was the reason why The Dark Knight was as good as it was. Without Heath Ledger, it would not have been as good as it was. Because realistically, Christopher Nolan could not work Batman. He was not capable of accurately working Batman, because every time Batman had a fight scene, he was incredibly stiff. Like in all of his Dark Knight movies, Batman's fight scenes were all really stiff. We did not actually see a good, accurate Batman fight scene until Justice League with Ben Affleck. Ben Affleck, like his fight scenes as Batman were great, and then Michael Keaton got his redemption fight scene arc in The Flash, but like the Dark Knight series, Batman's fighting fighting skills were not on display. It was terrible. Anyway, I've gone way off fucking topic. Bottom line is James Cameron and Christopher Nolan, like nobody cares about James Cameron. Christopher Nolan had some like a status that he could bring to the table, and I think with the Odyssey, from a fan perspective, from an audience perspective, nobody's going to care. Is he still going to hold sway in the Hollywood industry? Yes, because the Hollywood industry does not actually care about their audiences. They don't actually care about their fans. They just care about slapping themselves in the back and saying, look at how great we are. Oh, yes, we are really great. Let's give each other awards.
Years about indigenous blue furry space people that are a practice in misanthropy. While they do make a lot of money, I think they're awful. Simply put, Christopher Nolan is the king of Hollywood. Yet it's been quite an odyssey to get to his latest film, The Odyssey, one that was unexpected. When it was announced in December of 2024, I would argue it was met with overwhelming excitement. Certainly there were some questions, even from his biggest fans, about Christopher Nolan taking this big swing and adapting something that is the foundation of all of Western civilization storytelling, a mythological tale that's essentially epic fantasy, which could be perceived as out of his wheelhouse, but those were far and few between, and quite frankly, normal questions and nothing you would consider controversial until a month later when the casting was announced. And when it was originally announced, nobody really knew who was playing who, but in particular, Travis Scott, Zendaya, Lupita Nyong'o.
Okay, hang on, I want to point something out.
In particular, Travis.
Okay, I want to point something else. Christopher Nolan refused to allow an orchestral score for the Odyssey. Okay, he would not allow an orchestra to provide music for any part of the Odyssey. His rationale was because orchestras did not exist during the time of the Odyssey. That was his rationale. is during the time period when the Odyssey was set, orchestras did not exist, so we're not going to have an orchestral score. Big mistake number one. Mistake number two. He said that and then has Travis Scott do a rap for the ending credits. I'm not joking. For the end credits, it was a rap song. But God forbid he has an orchestral soundtrack for the movie itself. This is why I say Christopher Nolan is completely full of shit. He is high off of his own farts, and he is completely full of shit. And he is not this genius that everybody makes him out to be. And JJ Beats, thank you for the raid over on Kick. Welcome in, Raiders. Welcome in.
Scott, Zendaya, Lupita Nyong'o, and Elliot Page. Raised more than a few eyebrows, but didn't hurt the excitement for the film, considering 70mm screens sold out a year in advance. All was quiet for a while until the red flags went up when we...
Oh, and by the way, the screenings for Sully out. There is likely fake posts online about some woman claiming she delayed her pregnancy just so she could go see the Odyssey. That's like being pushed online right now. A post by a woman who said, I'm delaying getting pregnant just so I can go see the Odyssey. Which, by the way, I think it's a fake post. I 100% think that's a fake post. I don't believe that. Even the biggest Nolan diehards, yes, I know you're going to say, oh, yes, they are. Yes, they are. Even the most diehard Nolan fans, no. No, that is pushing it too far. That's pushing it outside the realm of believability.
Sold out a year in advance. All was quiet for a while until the red flags went up when we found out who was playing who, including Zendaya playing Athena and Lupita Nyong'o playing Helen of Troy, the face that launched 1,000 ships. But the most controversial...
Jesus, fuck! This has got to be AI. This can't be... Okay, I was going to back up one. This can't be real. I'm going to see in a second. That cannot be fucking real. That's got to be AI. But something about with the Helen of Troy thing. Apparently, and Skella Juniper, thank you for the raid. Thank you very much. Something that was said in regards to Helen of Troy is that not supposedly, but like they twisted her phrasing around. So basically, she took no responsibility for the war, where the face that the quote unquote the face that wants 1,000 ships. She basically abdicates any responsibility for her causing the war, and instead says, like, I'm sorry that this was done in my name, and abdicates any responsibility she had in causing the war. It's like, it's fucking insane. And thank you, Gramps.
Nyong'o playing Helen of Troy, the face that launched 1,000 ships. But the most controversial casting of them all is Elliot.
Yeah, okay, it is fake. I could see it. Okay, I wanted to see a playthrough. That Kyle guy, thank you for the dono. Thank you. It is fake because, okay, so this is edited. Cut in, you could see the outline.
All is Elliot Page, who was rumored to play Achilles, which ended up not being true. Elliot Page ended up being cast as Sinon, a character who wasn't even in the Iliad or the Odyssey. As bad as that was, what made things worse was the perceived association Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey had with Emily Wilson's feminist translation of Homer's work. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention our brothers and sisters who are history enthusiasts who were pointing out the inaccuracy of the armor and I don't don't know, the Viking ship that apparently
Yes.
identifies as a Greek ship. And then there's the overall Hollywood hypocrisy of an industry that is absolutely obsessed with identity, yet they ignored the identity of the country of origin of Homer's poem, Greece. Hypocrisy that was best exemplified in two separate posts from Variety on X, the first one of which Moana creatives on working closely to honor Polynesian culture and traditions and why representation matters. Yet it
Unless you're white. Let me finish Variety's thought there. Working closely to honor Polynesian culture and traditions and why representation matters in the live-action film, unless you're white. The Gleeks even white, they would be considered white. They would. Basically, if you're European, you're considered white. So yes, representation only matters if you're white in Hollywood. That's why you saw Leguizamo bitching and moaning about Latino representation. That's why you saw Elliot Page bitching and moaning about transgender representation. Yeah, unless you're white, representation absolutely matters. That is why the Academy put out that guideline saying that if you want to win an Academy Award, you have to have the check boxes of quote unquote underrepresented groups engaged in the film, either in crew or in cast. Yeah, it's like Hollywood is racist, okay? Let me just Hollywood is racist and sexist and misogynistic, misandristic. Okay, let me just say that right now. The Hollywood industry is racist, misandrist, and basically every ist that they claim everyone else is. Yes, and they hate redheads. Redhead strength. Redhead strong. Don't stop removing redheads. Stop disappearing redheads from Hollywood. Enough with the ginger side. Yes.
matters. Yet it appears that Variety completely forgot that just a month earlier, when people were genuinely asking why doesn't representation matter in Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey, they clap back with, these are just trolls who have a silly and wildly inaccurate argument. And just like that, The Odyssey dived headfirst into the culture war. There were criticisms from many, including Elon Musk, and the unthinkable happened. A Christopher Nolan film was ratioed on YouTube, leading
Not simply ratioed. Christopher Nolan's trailer was ratioed to fucking hell and back. This was for the trailer. 66,000 likes, 574 dislikes. Basically nobody liked this.
YouTube, leading many to believe that this film would be a flop based on everything they've seen from Hollywood over the last 10 years. Eventually, the corporate critics and influencers were allowed to see the film, and unsurprisingly, the corporate critics and influencers overwhelmingly love it. And once again, I'm going to have to differ with the corporate critics and maybe most of humanity, because I was overwhelmingly whelmed with The Odyssey. I wish I could tell you that the questionable casting, considering how little they were in the film, didn't affect my suspension of disbelief, or the red flags from that questionable casting weren't a sign of a story that will deconstruct the hero, or this film wasn't affected by modernity and influenced by Emily Wilson's translation. Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey is a mythological tale that has been grounded into dirt, and it turns out a lot of people's concerns were completely justified. I would call it bullet point plot. Now, maybe this is just me, but I was expecting a grand sweeping adventure that would be immersive and, hey, a little fun, because Nolan is capable of that, all while being thoughtful. What I ended up seeing was a 3-hour drama that felt both rushed and too long at the same time. And while there were some good scenes that we will get to, they are far and few between and mostly surrounded by exposition dumps of people saying really obvious things. And as far as the immersion goes, well, this mythological tale that is set at a specific time in a specific region feels very modern, and instead of an adventure, you get a slow plotting drama that is a study in loss, regret, and PTSD, which is a bit of a surprise considering the editing for this film because Chris Nolan has taken his trademark non-linear storytelling and dialed it up to 11. The film opens up with Travis Scott's The Bard doing some slam poetry recounting the fall of Troy, and then we're immediately into our first flashback where Elliot Page's Sinan is waddling across a beach and then getting killed in front of the Trojan horse. And no, Elliot Page's Sinan isn't just some pity-casting insignificant cameo. Elliot serves as a bookend to the story of sorts. Since it wouldn't be possible for me to recount even a basic plot synopsis in the order that Christopher Nolan told it, which would take at the very least a spreadsheet and at most 1,000 yards of yarn and pushpin.
No, that scene was not real. No, Nerdrotic was just putting that in there as like a comparable that Elliot Page's character dies right at the beginning of the film, but then comes back in flashbacks and also bookends it. That AI scene from Troy that inserted Elliot Page in there getting impaled by the spear, that's totally AI. Had nothing to do with the movie. He was basically just using it as a visual of how the character gets killed at the beginning of the movie.
I'll try to keep this as linear as possible because I'm not kidding. We have multiple perspectives recounting stories where we get flashbacks within the recounted stories. I am aware this is how Odysseus recounts his journey in the poem. I'm also aware that this is a technique that has worked very well for Nolan in the past, but it doesn't work very well here. Yeah. And apologies for any possible spoilers for an almost 3,000-year-old story. Odysseus, played by
Matt Damon,
is stranded on an island and tripping balls on the lotus flower with the mysterious nymph Calypso, played by a 60-year-old woman with plastic surgery. And unless you read Homer's Odyssey, Calypso will remain a mystery because they give absolutely no characterization or background on her. She's just woman on an island, while Odysseus struggles to...
Are you fucking kidding me? Like one of the key characters in the Odyssey, in Homer's work, in Calypso, where she keeps Odysseus there and basically keeps him like out of his mind with the memory erasing lotus flowers. And they don't even do the characterization of her. By the way, I heard something that apparently Calypso just lets him fucking go just because she's nice. And so they again bastardize his character because in the original works, the gods forced her to let Odysseus go. But in the movie, Calypso was like, I'm just a wonderful person, so I'm going to let you go. And basically just like remove the thematic agency that was in the original work. Yeah, she mind fucks him to keep him like docile for like a fucking year, I think it was. And then just, oh, I'm such a great guy. Go back to your wife. I'm such a great woman. Go back to your wife. I'll let you go. When in the original Odyssey, the gods forced her to let him go. So they completely removed that.
Remember his past, most of his kingdom of Ithaca.
No. Calypso didn't turn the crew into pigs. That was Circe. Different female character that Christopher Nolan royally fucked up.
Believe him to be dead, and a gaggle of suitors led by Robert Pattinson's Antinous have invaded his palace and are drinking him out of house and home while trying to court his wife Penelope, played by Anne Hathaway. She has been stalling them for years and trying to protect her son Telemachus, played by Tom Holland, whose life is constantly in danger. And the only people in the kingdom that really believe Odysseus is still alive is Penelope, Telemachus, the swineherder Aeneas, played by the Colombian John Leguizamo, and Odysseus's dog Argus. Meanwhile, back on the island of Ogygia with...
Okay, I was going to say something, but I'm going to wait. If we don't hear at the end, chat, remind me about the dog. If Nerdrotic doesn't mention it, I will talk about the dog.
Calypso, played by Charlize Theron, Odysseus, played by
Matt Damon,
starts to slowly recall his past after the 10-year war that led to the fall of Troy. Now, the Trojan horse and the sack of Troy loom like a shadow over the story and Odysseus. That's why Nolan made the decision to spread it throughout the film. And I was mostly okay with this until you get to the end and learn that it looms like a shadow over the film, because it's all about how it's interpreted, and we'll get to that. But after the sack, as Agamemnon makes his way way home, Odysseus takes a slower route where he occasionally runs into Athena, played by Zendaya, and I have to point out, unlike Lupita Nyong'o playing Clytemnestra and Helen of Troy, Elliot Page playing Sinon, and this guy playing H-1B Greek, credit where credit is due, within the story, they do explain why Athena looks like this. And that's another thing we'll get to in just a bit. Now, before we get to one of my favorite parts of the movie, I want to give you my favorite scene when these two guys announce themselves as Greek soldiers.
We're Greeks from Ithaca.
No, you're not.
What?
As Greek soldiers.
We're Greeks.
What? Why? I didn't realize Greece was that close to Pakistan and India. I had no idea, geographically speaking, that the two countries were so close to one another that they would have this kind of overlap.
From Ithaca.
No, you're not. And here I was thinking there wasn't any levity in this film. But this brings us to the Odyssey portion of the Odyssey, which is the 10-year journey from Troy to Ithaca, which is about the middle third of the movie. And outside of the horrific casting, this is the biggest question I had for this movie from the get-go. How will Christopher Nolan deal with gods and monsters? Since everybody's going to bring it up, I know how Troy handled them. They didn't. It was my criticism back then and remains my criticism today. As far as the Odyssey is concerned, they did a little more. The gods are either depicted as forces of nature or what could be interpreted as PTSD delusions, but there are monsters. Starting with the giant cyclops Polymephus, which did look cool. This is exactly what I came to this movie to see. Unfortunately, despite the very impressive practical effects, it still felt a little flat, including there being no conversation between Odysseus and the Cyclops, and no use of the name Nobody and no other Cyclops. Just in case you're not familiar.
Okay, he's going to explain it.
Familiar with the story, the Nobody thing is kind of important. So in the poem, Odysseus gets the Cyclops drunk. He asks Odysseus what's his name. He responds with Nobody. So when Odysseus is stabbing him in the eye and Polymephus is crying out for the other Cyclops and they ask who is harming you, he responds with Nobody. Nolan said he tried to put it in, but it just wouldn't work. And again, it looked...
That's a failure of you as an artist. If you are going to take one of the most famous stories in human history with a scene that is specifically famous for the fact that Odysseus basically tricks the Cyclops, calls himself Nobody, and when he stabbed the Cyclops. Now, granted, I heard the story a little bit differently. It wasn't that when the Cyclops is calling out for the other Cyclops and he says Nobody is hurting me. The way I heard the story was, you know, he blinded the Cyclops and they escape, and then later other Cyclops came and said, "Who harmed you?" And the Cyclops responds with Nobody. That was the story that I always heard in that respect, but same thing, different day. But everybody knows the story about with the Cyclops and how it's basically everybody knows the story that Odysseus calls himself Nobody and gets away from the Cyclops, and the Cyclops is saying Nobody is hurting me. Everybody knows that. And because Christopher Nolan has become such a fucking hack, because he has fallen so far, he couldn't figure out a way to get that specific point of that specific scene that everybody knows into the story. Just couldn't figure it out. You're Christopher Nolan. If you're telling me that you are too fucking stupid to get one of the most famous parts of a story into your movie about said story, what the fuck are you doing making this story in the first place?
Fantastic, and this is one of the few supernatural monster scenes that Nolan actually spent time on, where by the end you actually feel sorry for the Cyclops, and I did like that bit, but this is where I started noticing a major omission from Odysseus's character, because in the story, he's kind of famous for being cheeky. Instead, we get a very somber and serious Odysseus in a very somber and serious film. But now Odysseus and his crew are cursed to wander the sea for years because they harmed the son of Poseidon. And their next stop is not the floating island of Aeolia that was left out with a lot of other stuff. No, it's the Lystragonians, the land of bloodthirsty cannibal giants. Now, we didn't necessarily see them being cannibals, and they weren't necessarily giants, but they were big and in steel-plated armor in the Bronze Age, but I don't have a problem with their look. It kind of reminds me of the lore of the remnants of a pre-Diluvian advanced civilization. I don't know if it was supposed to be funny, but it was, and it played out something like this. After that incredibly short scene, they're off to their encounter with Cersei, played by Samantha Morton, where it's been reported by some influencers and corporate critics that her performance was on the level of Heath Ledger's Joker.
Really?
You serious?
While it was good, I would say pump the brakes on the overpraise. Now, every stop Odysseus and what's left of his crew makes is for provisions. This time, the crew is pissed off enough to tell Odysseus to stay back as they go up and talk to Cersei. And as they walk up to her house, they see a lot of docile predators like lions and cheetahs and discarded armor. Nothing suspicious there, and this leads into what is my favorite moment and scene in the film, at least in the beginning. Cersei feeds the crew and they just start eating savagely, and then she eventually turns them all into pigs. It's both gruesome and cool. It is a genuine horror scene, and this is one of the few times in the film where the music actually fits. But as what happens a lot in the Odyssey,
and that's what I've heard a lot about this movie, is like from reviewers that have gone to see it. The scene with Cersei where all of the crew turns into pigs was the standout scene for the film. Every single reviewer that I've seen, like obviously Gary, Disparu, what's his name? Chris Gore, like all of them have said that that scene with Cersei turning the crew into pigs was a good scene. It was standout, it was a horror show, and it was well done. It was like the one scene out of the movie that was good.
Resolution is a bit rushed. Of course, they were going to have Odysseus staying there for a year and banging Cersei. Instead, we get what I believe is one of the least subtle moments of leaning into the spirit of the Emily Wilson translation by making Cersei some sort of trauma survivor. Cersei holds a dagger to Odysseus's neck as she talks about the men's gluttony, toxicity, and thirst for war, and in isolation, it would have been fine and matches what's in the poem, but you also have to consider that they radically changed the character of Cersei so they could really lean into what is a through line in the film, toxic masculinity. You know, the good old misunderstood female antagonist. Odysseus apologizes for his men's toxic masculinity and gets directions to Hades, where Odysseus once again runs into the shade of Elliot Page's Sinon. And this is where it becomes very hard to argue that this was simply just a brief and insignificant cameo and pity casting, or stunt casting as some would call it. Despite the 5+ minutes of screen time, Elliot Page's Sinon turns out to be a significant character. Elliot Page's Sinon confronts Odysseus about lying to him about being left behind to present the Trojan horse, not knowing that the Greek soldiers were in it. Odysseus tells Sinon he needed him to believe the lie for the deception. Elliot Page's Sinon also informs Odysseus that when he took the place of Robert Pattinson's Antinous, his family was offered money, but they welched on the deal, framing Elliot Page's Sinon as a victim of both the protagonist and antagonist. So Christopher Nolan chose to take a character who wasn't even in the Iliad or the Odyssey, deliberately change their story because Sinon did know the Greek soldiers were in the Trojan horse in a completely different poem, and then cast Sinon as Elliot Page, making Sinon one of the few good honorable men in this story, where Sinon is both a symbol of Odysseus's shame and part of his motivation to go home, to seek retribution against what is the leader of the suitors, Robert Pattinson's Antinous.
By the way, I don't know if Gary's going to get to this. For those of you that are familiar with the story of the Odyssey, what is his motive? What is Odysseus's motivation to get home? What is the one driving force that keeps him going to get home? Anybody remember? His wife. His wife, and by extension, his son, his family. That is the one singular factor that keeps pushing him to keep going, even when everything's down. That doesn't exist here. he in fact, when I was watching Disparu's review, he in fact is actually talking about not wanting to go home. That, like, despite the fact that the original poem is, I want to get home to my wife, I want to get home to my son. In this movie, he's like, I don't know if I want to go home. Like, that's what Christopher Nolan did to this fucking movie, did to this story. Yeah.
Terrorizing his wife Penelope and son Telemachus wasn't enough. In other words, it's really hard to argue that this wasn't subversive casting meant to be provocative. One could argue Christopher Nolan is known for bringing back actors that he likes, and I would argue that both things can be true, because you'll have a hard time convincing me that Elliot Page was cast on their acting prowess in a scene that dominated their time in the underworld, taking away screen time.
Point of fact, the role of Sinan was made specifically for Elliot Page. Okay? They literally took a character from a completely different poem, inserted it into the Odyssey / the Iliad, specifically for Elliot Page. That's who the role was written for. Again, try and tell me that Hollywood is not trying to astroturf the ever-living fuck out of Elliot Page.
Time from the brilliant James Remar's Tiresias, the Blind Prophet, and we didn't get to see Odysseus interact with the shades of Achilles, Ajax, his mother, all of whom I would have much rather seen than seeing Sinan whine about being lied to. Now, when I originally heard about this scene, I suspected that Sinan might be playing a proxy for the Shade of Achilles, but in truth, Sinan is playing a proxy for Elpenor, another male character that Elliot Page was rumored to play. Odysseus does encounter the Shade of Agamemnon, who informs him that he was killed upon his return by the now twin sister of Helen of Troy, Clytemnestra, due to the fact that he did sacrifice their daughter for some favorable winds. And Agamemnon warns Odysseus to be careful upon his return home. And then, almost as if it's obligatory, Tiresias rattles off the rest of the prophecy, which is sailing past the Sirens, essentially having to sacrifice 6 men to Scylla, the 6-headed monster, rather than losing all of his men to the whirlpool of Charybdis, and that the rest of them are going to die when they slaughter the cattle of the sun god Helios. And almost as if it's obligatory, that's pretty much how the scenes play out. You don't even see or hear the Sirens, and when Odysseus insists on...
You're kidding me. The one big part of the story, the Sirens, you don't even see them. You don't even hear them. Fucking why? If there is one mythological creature that everyone knows from the Odyssey, other than the Cyclops, the other mythological, like, creature, horror, whatever you want to call it, is the motherfucking Sirens. That's what everybody knows about. It's too dirty. Yeah, I guarantee. Yeah, it's like, oh, we don't want women to look bad because they take great fucking pains. And Cersei the Witch, sure, Cersei the Witch too. But they take great pains throughout the entirety of this movie to not make a single female character look bad. Not one. Everything that I've heard about this movie is they do everything in their power to make every single female character look like a good guy or a poor misunderstood soul. There is not one single female character in this movie that I'm aware of that has a negative connotation to. Because you can't do that in modern day. In modern day of 2026, you're not allowed to make a woman look like a bad guy. You're not allowed to make a woman look like a villain. That basically goes against the law in Hollywood.
Play out. You don't even see or hear the Sirens, and when Odysseus insists on having himself tied to the mast, it's jarring because it's out of character for the Odysseus in Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey, who's never shown himself to be very cunning or curious. And instead of gaining insight like in the poem, instead the song tells him of basically all his broken dreams. And the most important, and one could argue the most subversive thing, the song tells Odysseus that he doesn't really want to go home, which directly contradicts Odysseus' Odysseus's entire motivation in the original poem. The Charybdis and Scylla scene was a complete letdown, particularly with Scylla that looked awful, which I'm guessing might have had something to do with Christopher Nolan's aversion to CGI and his aversion to anything with imagination or wonder. Most, if not all of these scenes were treated with, well, I guess we have to do this, so I'll do my best and we'll get it over with as quick as we can, which is exactly how it plays out when Odysseus's crew slaughters the cattle of the sun god Helios, and then they eventually die in a storm, and it all happens in about 10 minutes. And what's left out? The land of the Lotus Eaters, the floating island of Aeolia, the Phaeacians and King Alcinous. Again, Calypso is just a lady with plastic surgery.
By the way, hang on.
The Phaeacians and King Alcinous. Again, Calypso.
Tell me something. Does this look like ancient garb to you? What Charlize Theron is wearing right now as Calypso. Does this look like ancient garb? Or does this look like something you'd see on a bad runway in New York? This looks like something a fashion victim would be wearing today. Like, what are we doing? What are we doing?
Calypso is just a lady with plastic surgery on a beach with no mention of her being the daughter of Atlas. And on that note, there's no mention of Circe being the daughter of Helios, the sun god, and Perse, because there isn't any real gods in this story. And there's definitely no male gods. Now, they show the female deities while not really saying they're deities. We'll get to Zendaya's Athena in just a second. But as far as the male gods are concerned, there's no Hermes. Poseidon is presented as a raging ocean. Zeus is thunder and lightning. And Zendaya's Athena, who may or may not be a goddess, spends most of the film shaking her head or scowling at Odysseus when she isn't shaming him. This brings us to the suitors, which is a large portion of the film and the one I found the most redundant. Now, it will be an opportunity for the actors to really choose some scenery, but the only person who really pulled that off was Robert Pattinson. Aside from Elliot Page and the very brief appearance of Travis Scott, nobody was terrible. Robert Pattinson was the best, playing essentially a mustache-twirling villain with Antinous. And surprisingly enough, I think John Leguizamo did a commendable job stealing a part from a Greek actor, playing Odysseus's pal and swineherder Aeneas. Tom Holland did a great job playing Tom Holland, and I particularly like the scene when Spider-Man went to Sparta to meet the Punisher, who's married to Nakia from Black Panther. And yes, this is where we see Lupita Nyong'o playing Helen of Troy, who also plays her now twin sister Clytemnestra. And while she is barely in the film, it is worth mentioning this is 100% stunt casting. They depict her as disfigured, insinuating that Frank Castle beat his wife. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention that John Bernthal plays a great John Bernthal in this. And in this scene where Telemachus travels to Sparta to learn about his father Odysseus, we get more context about the sack of Troy. Again, a tale that was spread throughout the film, but once we get to the actual reason for the sack of Troy, well, that's when things go downhill for me. For one, turns out it wasn't over Helen. They made that abundantly clear when she apologizes for all the wars being fought in her name. It was because Agamemnon needed an excuse to fight the Trojans over control of some trade routes. And again, probably due to Christopher Nolan's aversion to CGI, the actual sack of Troy, which should have been this really epic battle, wasn't. While I won't say it wasn't shot well, it had the scale of a mid-budget streaming show. And this has been pointed out.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's bad. For a Christopher Nolan film to be viewed in the vein of it had the budget of a mid-level streaming show, that's fucking bad. Like, if it was shot well and, the sets were great and obviously he's not using, like, bearing in mind, people are going to view Gary's video here and just go, oh, he was hoping it would fail. He was really, he was looking at it negatively from the get-go, and he just hates Christopher Nolan and he just wants to fail. No. Gary typically, it keeps a very, like, he won't watch a preview and he'll say, this looks like it's going to be bad, but we'll wait and see. He goes into a movie that he is reviewing with an open mind. Like, I could be totally wrong, and this could absolutely kick ass. If Gary is saying that this is a monster budget film with the appearance of a mid-level streaming show, you can take that to the bank, which is it's not a good look for Christopher Nolan. It's not. Like, well, I mean, look at this here.
It had the scale.
Look at this. Look at what we're seeing here in these shots. Does this look big budget? Does this look big budget? Does this look like a 250 minimum? And I still am not buying that this was the budget. Does this look like a $250 million film?
It had the scale of a mid-budget.
Look at this. Look at this setting right here. Does this look like something you would expect to see from a set piece, from a director who does not use CGI, who basically only goes practical? And this is what you would expect to see from a $250 million movie. Now,
of a mid-budget streaming show. And this has been pointed out by many, and I completely agree with them. This film didn't deserve an R rating, and I don't know why it got it. There wasn't any real savagery in the battle. We didn't see any blood or guts. Outside of the Cyclops eating a dude, the Odyssey is pretty bloodless. But by the end of the Sack of Troy, you see what this movie is. Now, certainly, it has a through line of toxic masculinity, and certainly it's got some questionable casting, but all of that could have been overcome with good storytelling. The only problem is, this is a story of deconstruction. This is a story of destroying the hero of Odysseus. And that hammers...
who were the damn knights? Those were the giants. That was but the part of the story where Odysseus and his men encountered the giants, like the people eat, like... Yeah, those were giants. Yeah, I'm gonna butcher this. Lystragonians. Yeah, that's who the knights were, wearing the Iron Age armor.
Deconstruction. This is a story of destroying the hero of Odysseus, and that hammers you over the face with Zendaya's Athena, because again, they explain why she is playing the role. Odysseus witnesses the beheading of a priestess of the temple of Athena, and it is Zendaya. So either Athena took her form, or more than likely, she is just a PTSD delusion of Odysseus. The very sad, somber...
Okay, so that kind of makes sense why she would play the role, but again, it's a Greek story, and Zendaya does not look Greek. Even if it makes sense, like, why they would cast her if she was the priestess that was beheaded, and so is PTSD or Athena or whatever is taken on her form, it's still a Greek priestess that doesn't look Greek.
An unremarkable Odysseus played by
Matt Damon.
Jason Bourne makes it back in time to save his son Spider-Man from the suitors who were sent by Batman to kill him before he makes it back from Sparta. And as disguised as a beggar, Odysseus assesses the situation, and then we get that big daddy's coming home scene, and I really thought they were going to bring it home here. Odysseus, still disguised as the beggar, has a chat with Penelope and discusses the breaking of Zeus's law, which is essentially the sacred code that dictates hosts must provide food, shelter, and safety to strangers, and how the Trojan horse and the sack of Troy was the ultimate violation of it, leading to the end of their civilization, in a point where we get a particularly bad line of dialogue where Odysseus refers to the Bronze Age within the Bronze Age that comes off something like this.
What, we some kind of
Bronze Age.
And then we get to the final battle scene where Penelope sets up the challenge with Odysseus's bow. He is able to string it and fire an arrow through the axis, and then commence to slaughter all the suitors. While I'm guessing it's pretty difficult to film one guy with a bow and an arrow taking on dozens of dudes and killing them, this is Christopher Nolan. I hold him to a higher standard, and this scene was just clumsy. But in the end, Jason Bourne kills Batman and avenges Kitty Pryde. Then he crowns his son Spider-Man and goes into exile as he sails off to the west to the Undying Lands. And what you're left with is a 3-hour slog that, again, is a movie that feels rushed and long.
Okay, so he didn't say it, so I'm going to say it. The dog part. So when Odysseus goes off on his journey, he has a dog that's like a puppy. It's a young pup. Very, and this dog for 20 years has been waiting for Odysseus to return. This dog is dedicated to waiting for Odysseus. I think it maybe like goes out and waits for it every day. Okay, for 20 years. That is how dedicated this dog is. By the time Odysseus returns, the dog is very old. And don't bring up Fry's dog. I will start to cry. Don't bring up the Futurama. I'm deliberately trying not to think about that because I will cry like a baby. I always cry like a baby about the Futurama story behind the dog. But when Odysseus finally returns home from his journey, the dog is waiting. The dog is waiting. Oh, it's like 20 years old. It's at the end of its life. With its dying breath, I think it just kind of licks him, or it shows that the dog is happy that Odysseus is back. And the minute Odysseus finishes pets the dog, wags its tail with the last remaining bit of its strength. And as Odysseus is petting the dog is expressing its happiness in the only way it can with the strength it has left, and then it dies. And Odysseus, according to what Disparu said, Odysseus's response to his dog waiting 20 years for him is bury that and walks away. That's what Christopher Nolan thinks about a dog waiting 20 years for its master, expressing happiness with its last ounce of strength before dying, and Odysseus's response to this display of devotion. And Odysseus just goes, bury that, and walks away. That alone, I would walk out of the fucking theater. If I actually paid money to go see this movie and I saw that, I would immediately get up and walk out. Fuck that.
All at the same time, a bad adaptation that, if you leave all of that out, is still a very mid film. One, in my humble opinion, is deeply subversive, which is surprising for Christopher Nolan. And there is little doubt that the Emily Wilson translation was highly influential on this, specifically with the omissions or changes from the source material and how they're framed. Now, I'll just name a few in no particular order off the top of my head. Helen of Troy being abused and used as an excuse for the cause of the Trojan War, with no mention of Aphrodite. Circe not being portrayed as a fearsome, beautiful woman, but instead she is a survivor of trauma, and they omitted Odysseus staying with her and shagging for the better part of a year. The sirens were literally muted and not seen, and they omitted that they died because Odysseus survived listening to their song. And instead of Calypso being portrayed as the embodiment of seduction and entrapment, leading to unconsensual taking the skim boat to Tuna Town, she's just a lonely 60-year-old woman with plastic surgery on a beach. There was also the omission of the maidservants of the suitors who were executed by Telemachus, Athena either being a hallucination or a god that takes on the likeness of a woman killed in the sack of Troy. The only deities or goddesses being portrayed in the film were women, of course suspiciously leaving out Aphrodite, but the worst crime of them all was how Christopher Nolan treated the character of Odysseus. That being said, while Emily Wilson's translation may have been an influence, ultimately, every decision in this film that's good or bad lays at the feet of Christopher Nolan. In other words, it's not like Christopher Nolan gets producer notes. Nobody tells this guy what to do, and that's why his worst crime was the treatment of Odysseus. Instead of being the intelligent, cunning, resourceful, arrogant, yet deeply flawed hero of the Trojan War, he's portrayed by Matt Damon as a sad, remorseful, not particularly intelligent or cunning, traumatized survivor of the Trojan War. And it's insinuated his actions have led to the end of the Bronze Age. And it's not like he's terrible in this, but his Odysseus just lacks aura. And so does Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey. It was a very stark, dry, competently put together film with some beautiful shots and some horrible sound mixing, but only made worse by the awful soundtrack. Now, by no means is this bad as something like Supergirl to me, and despite what I think about this film, a lot of people are loving this movie, and it's become a cultural event. For me, it was grim and without feeling. Hell, When Argus died, I felt nothing. Now, as a dog owner, how can you feel nothing when a dog dies? The ADD editing didn't allow anything to really sit. I couldn't get engaged with the characters. Now, this has worked for Nolan in the past, but it doesn't work here. Felt like I was watching a 3-hour sizzle reel, and for me, the verisimilitude was shot by, of course, the casting, the modernity, the modern vernacular, and the general look. I hated the color palette. Everything looked pretty drab. And as our good friend Metatron pointed out, you know, in ancient Greece, the structures weren't ruins, they were actually new and colorful. And I don't know how the Greek army had a hard time getting over these walls of Troy. And the Trojan armor looked like something out of Rings of Power. And while I've said this is essentially fantasy based on mythology, that mythology has the backdrop of real events in real places like Troy. Now that I've seen it twice, I can confidently say, in my humble opinion, that Christopher Nolan was the wrong guy for this story. It is not Homer's Odyssey, it is Christopher Nolan's Odyssey. And I think we found Christopher Nolan's Achilles heel. This is a very somber, analytical, and serious film, and I believe to take on genre like this, you need heart, imagination, and a...
Okay, well, there's another factor involved here. Christopher Nolan doesn't do fantastical. That's the problem. We saw this like he used to. Like look at what he did with Tenet. Look at what he did with Inception. He used to do fantastical. But then look at what he did with Batman. Look at what he's done with the Odyssey. He's way too entrenched in not only practical, but also realistic. He's doing a superhero movie, and he's entrenched in making it realistic when we are talking about fucking Batman. That's why Bane looked and sounded like shit, is because that he wanted it to be realistic and not be fantastical, because Bane in Batman's Rogues Gallery is fantastical in the way he does, like with his Venom. Like the whole purpose of Bane with the Venom is not only is Bane very smart, but when he hits the Venom, he grows and gains a shit ton of muscle and becomes a big behemoth, kind of similar to the Hulk. But Christopher Nolan didn't do that in service to, well, I want this to be a realistic Batman. Same thing with the Odyssey. The Odyssey is a story. It's a collective, two stories. It's the Iliad and the Odyssey that is steeped in the mythological, that is steeped in the fantastical. And Christopher Nolan's like, no, I want to make it realistic. Why? Why would you ever even consider making a realistic version of the Iliad and the Odyssey? What purpose would that serve? The whole point of the Iliad and the Odyssey was these supernatural creatures. You're talking about gods influencing everything. You're talking about fantastical creatures like the Cyclops. You're talking about, witches like Circe that actually exhibit superpowers. So why would you try and do a realistic take on this story? It makes no fucking sense.
Sense of wonder. And would it kill you to have a little fun? I'm going to be real. I would rather watch an Odyssey directed by Michael Bay. And I completely understand I'm going to be in the minority on this one because of the power of Nolan. This is nowhere near the worst film ever made, and it's nowhere near a...
And there's the problem. This is why you have all of this media, the mainstream media shills pushing so hard on this. It is the power of Nolan, and it is the power of DEI. Because, make no mistake, this was a film written specifically for DEI. It was. It had, they can try and deny it all they want. This movie was nothing but check boxes. And they checkboxed the fuck out of it. Black Helen of Troy, transgender soldier that was not even in the story to begin with and got inserted into the story specifically for a transgender actor. You've got every ethnicity of actor in this Greek epic except for Greek people. I've mentioned this to you before. There is not one single Greek actor in this entire fucking movie. This Greek epic does not even have a single Greek actor whatsoever. This was Checkbox's The Movie. And is it going to win awards? Yes. Yes, this movie is going to win awards. But that doesn't matter. Because the awards don't matter. The awards, the Academy, has not mattered for the better part of almost 2 decades. Nobody fucking cares about the awards anymore, except for the Hollywood elitists themselves. They are the only ones that give a shit about these awards. The regular paying customers don't fucking care about awards anymore. They mean precisely nothing. 30 plus years ago, yeah, they meant something. 30 plus years ago, saying Oscar nominated or Oscar winning actor, director, etc., presents to you this movie, and the viewing audience will go, oh shit, this is going to be amazing. This person's working on it, this person's starring in it, and they've got an Oscar. This is going to be fantastic. And 9 times out of 10, it probably was. These days, the award means nothing. Nobody. No paying customer gives a flying fuck if it's a movie, an actor, a director, a producer. Nobody fucking cares if they win an award because it doesn't mean anything anymore, and it hasn't for probably the last 2 decades.
10 out of 10 masterpiece, and if you enjoy it, you go right ahead. I look forward to never seeing it again, and ultimately, if I had to describe Christopher Nolan's Odyssey in one sentence, it plays out like an atheist adapting the Bible.
Nerderotic.com.
Live.
If you like what you heard, please like, share, and subscribe. If you didn't like what you heard, I thank you for listening this long. I will see you in the next video.
Okay, yeah, so like this was, this is the second review that I've heard from someone that went to go see the movie from from YouTube critics that are actually honest in their reviews. No one's liking this movie. Point of fact, I'm going to show you something. You want to know? But I will show you just how poorly this movie is doing. So, all right, so we have the Rotten Tomatoes score, which of course is bullshit. You've got a 98%, 95% by the critics, and 97% supposedly by fans. That's what the popcorn meter is. Supposedly it's by the fans. Not paid shills or bots, of course. Of course! But here's the Metacritic score. 89 from critic reviews. Look at the audience score. Look at the audience score. 5.1 on Metacritic. It is mid at best. Audience score, which is literally the only score that matters, by the way, mid at best. That's what the Odyssey is. It is mid at best. And yes, Rotten Tomato typically deletes any negative reviews. Let me see if I can find what it's taken in. Hang on. Current box office for the Odyssey. By the way, just as a reminder, Angry Joe gave it a 10 out of 10. Gee, I'm shocked that Chill Joe gave it a 10 out of 10. I'm shocked. Shocked! Okay. So, opening weekend according to Grok. Massive opening weekend, domestic, US and Canada, 124.5 million. Number one film of the weekend, beat pre-release forecasts of 80 to 100 million, with some estimates around 95. International, 139.6. Cool. Worldwide, 264.1 million. Okay, cool. So, according to this, worldwide box office opening weekend, it made back the production budget. Production budget was $250 million. Now, something to remind you of. Production budget was $250 million. They also very heavily advertised this film. So you have to at least double what the production cost with the advertising. So if you take production cost of $250 million, which again, that's reported, don't know how true that is, because if all of this was practical, that $250 million could be on the light side. We'll find out about that in the future. But $250 million production, at least $250 million for advertising. So total production costs between production and advertising would be approximately $500 million. So for them to break even, the studio needs to make over $500 million. The studio needs to make $500 million total just to break even. Okay, that's just to break even. Now, people are saying, "Well, look, it's made $264.1 million in its opening weekend." Well, why? Obviously, it's going like gangbusters. Cool. Two factors. Number one, does this thing have legs? And hello, Tactical Templar. Welcome in, Raiders over on Kick. Hi, how you doing? I'm rambling, so please excuse me while I continue to ramble. I hope you had a wonderful stream. So, $264 million opening weekend. People are normally going to go, "Oh, that's a fantastic take. Wonderful job. They've done great." Here's the problem. Number one, it needs $500 million just to break even for the production and advertising. So it's $500 million. $264 million opening weekend. Yeah, it's great. It's about half of what it needs to make. Here's the other question. Does this movie have legs? Sure. You're going to get opening weekend is the biggest weekend by far. Every movie, you're making the most money in your opening weekend. That is standard. So, how much does this have legs? How much can it sustain into week 2? Is it going to be like Supergirl, where it lost something like 60 to 80% of its audience after the first week? And so that audience drops off and you're not getting that more income. Will this have enough legs to sustain at all over the course of the next week for after opening weekend? We don't know. And when the reviews are coming out, it depends on how much people listen to actual reviewers instead of the paid Shield movie reviewers. So depending on the legs this thing has, it may or may not sustain. That's factor number one. Factor number two that everybody loves to forget. Oh, they say, "Oh, well, if it earns by the end of its run $500 million, well, it made back its money." No, it didn't, because the theater typically keeps about somewhere in the neighborhood of 60 to 75% of the money that comes in. So this dollar amount that made $264.1 million, that's total what came into the theater. The studio is not getting back $264 million. The studio is getting back roughly 25% of this $264 million, or maybe 35%. I forget what the division is between movie and between theater and studio. But the studio is going to get back roughly 25 to 35% of this $264.1 million that they got opening weekend. Translation, theater cuts typically 50. It depends. International theaters, the cut is higher. I think domestically, theater cut maybe less than 50%. But I don't know. I'm not entirely sure. But bottom line, for this movie to make to about break even, this movie has to do $1 billion, probably just to break even. After you factor in the production costs and advertising costs, what the theater keeps and what the studio gets, this film needs to make about $1 billion for the studio to break even in regards to the money that it put into production and advertising. This doesn't sound like a movie that's going to do $1 billion. Unless this thing has incredible legs on it that it can sustain for another 2 weeks, because that's what it would need to do. It would need to sustain for about 2 weeks with this level of intake for it to reach that $1 billion threshold. I don't know if it's going to do that. I don't. I could see this thing. It might. I'm not being definitive here. Okay. I'm not going to say definitively there's no shot in hell that this is going to make $1 billion. I'm not saying that. It is entirely possible that it might. It can't. We've seen, but this coming week will be very telegraphic in terms of the legs of sustainability that the Odyssey has. I'm really very curious. And they say 125 million, so 250 million production and reported 125 million in marketing. I don't think that's correct. Already passes production budget in the first weekend and is on strong trajectory to $1 billion globally, with excellent audience reception. Again, this week will be very telling whether or not it is on a trajectory to 1 billion globally. And yeah, I do not buy this 125 million for marketing. I don't believe that. I flat up don't believe it. I think marketing for a movie, especially big budget movies, is typically matching the production budget. You take the production budget, double it, and there's your marketing. So we shall see. This coming week is going to be very telling. It will. This weekend is going to be very telling in terms of, does this movie have legs? We'll see. We shall see.